The Austrian racing weekend was dominated by an F1 technicality, with us asking if it's necessary. The technicality that we speak of is two words you're probably sick of hearing after this weekend: track limits. Such was the effect of track limits that Aston Martin lodged a protest against the FIA. Toto Wolff was not impressed with Lewis for his continued whining on team radio. Even Horner got involved, with the Red Bull team principal not impressed. The drivers themselves were also not exactly happy about the outcomes of track limits. Want to know what drivers said about the track limits situation? And what was the outcome of Aston Martin's process? Did it really benefit the green machine? Stick around to find out. The Austrian Grand Prix was about 4 out of 5 with plenty of action, but not much happening where we all wanted it, with Max even having enough time to pit for softs and get the fastest lap. The man means business this year, not letting a single point go. We didn't know what to expect about the Austrian Grand Prix, as there had been a lot of noise about Aston Martin and Ferrari, and as always, there had been the usual chatter of whether we would finally see the return of Mercedes to the front of the pack, and in the end, the biggest surprise was the rise of Lando Norris in the McLaren, with the British driver getting driver of the day and having a fantastic race. Apart from his continued whining over the team radio, the driver of the day was thoroughly deserved, with the young driver finally showing why he is so sought after by some of the top teams. Whether Lando ends up at a top team is another question, but not for today's video. One thing that is for sure is the Austrian race weekend was a great showcase of how the new format can work for F1. Not only did we have competitive action throughout the weekend, but we also had some action at the front in both the sprint and the main race. In the sprint, there was almost a coming together between Max and Sergio, with both drivers not impressed by each other. But when do drivers ever think that they're in the wrong? In the end, there was nothing to it, with Max and Checo finishing first and second, and there was no repeat to the Max and Daniel incident in Monaco. There was even drama in qualifying, with the old battle of Max and Lewis rearing its head, with Lewis impeding Max and then Max looking to get some revenge on the 7-time world champion. In the main race, we saw Max continue his dominance of 2023, and it's really starting to make us wonder if he doesn't just go and win all of the remaining races. Right now, the Red Bull is in a league of its own, and not just that, but Max himself is a very clever racer. The 25-year-old provided a fine example of his elite form by smartly holding back before completing the move on Leclerc to ensure that the Ferrari didn't gain DRS on the following straight, something that his teammate Sergio Perez took 2 attempts to get right and a prompt from his team in order for him to realize it. That's not taking away from the Mexican's performance, with Max's closest competitor fighting from P15 to P3, which is no mean feat. Apart from Lando Norris, the biggest eyebrow raised was a Ferrari, with Leclerc in P2 and Sainz in P4, and it could have been even better for the Ferraris if they had improved their strategy. But hey, it looks like not much has changed in that sense. The biggest disappointment must go to Mercedes, with the team seeming to take 2 steps forward in Canada and Barcelona, but 1 step back in Austria. After Hamilton passed Norris off the line, the Mercedes was unable to pull away from the McLaren and came under heavy pressure. As Hamilton struggled with his brakes, Norris came on the radio several times to report the 7-time world champion for exceeding track limits. Speaking to Sky F1 after the race, Norris suggested that Hamilton got off lightly with his punishment. "Yeah, I was going to do a live commentary at every corner pretty much," Norris laughed. Norris added, "Hamilton only got a 5-second penalty? It should have been way more. He had about 4 strikes in 1 lap." The stewards agreed, and Hamilton swiftly earned himself 4 pings and a 5-second penalty that he would serve at his second pit stop. However, by that point, he had already been passed on track by Norris, who appeared to have genuine speed advantage over the Mercedes in his upgraded McLaren. We're not going to lie, Lando's continued complaining did annoy us a bit, but quite frankly, Lewis Hamilton was way worse. He just didn't stop until a rather irate Toto Wolff had to hop on team radio just to tell him to get on with it. Those complaints, along with reminders of his dissatisfaction of the W14's performance, led to an intervention from Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff, in which he said, "Lewis, we know the car is slow, please just drive it." The mood in the Mercedes camp was bleak, with Toto having some pretty blunt words after the race. It was terribly difficult, actually worse than we thought. The car was just slow. Of course, it doesn't help when you get penalties, but it also wouldn't have made much difference. Maybe we could have stayed ahead of Fernando. We, and also the Aston Martins, although that doesn't make it any better, were just nowhere with our pace. Overall, it was a black day. Well, not a black day. We don't want to go that far. Just a bad day, Wolff summed up. The Mercedes drivers were equally lost and bemused by the lack of performance in the W14, But hey, what's new? The Mercedes don't look to be anywhere nearer the front than we thought they would be. The real issue with the Austrian Grand Prix was the track limits, with the whole weekend marred by the F1 rule. 7 drivers were hit with 5-second time penalties during the Austrian Grand Prix due to exceeding the track limits on more than 3 occasions over the course of the 71-lap race. Track limits were the topic on everyone's lips during the weekend due to the sheer volume of lap deletions encountered over the course of Friday's qualifying, Saturday's sprint action, and Sunday's Grand Prix. According to Horner, it is not a good look for the sport. I think the whole thing with track limits needs to be looked at because it's making us look a little bit amateurish, he told Sky F1. With so many good drivers breaking those limits, it's just too easy. I think it's something that needs to be looked at here for next year. Either the curbs or maybe a bit of gravel on the other side of the curb would just tidy that up, but I think with all those penalties coming through, it's very tough for the drivers. The FIA later confirmed that there were 1,200 possible track limit breaches that they had to deal with, and with that many lap times being looked at, there was bound to be a mistake, and it leads you to ask the question, surely for certain races, we can bend the rule just a bit in order to get some better racing. If it's just 1 or 2 drivers, then it's clearly a driver issue, but with 7 drivers getting a penalty and 100 lap times getting deleted, surely we need to look at it. Well, not really, according to Toto Wolff, with his drivers suffering mixed fortunes. I think, no, the stewards are doing their job, it's what the rules say, he said matter-of-factly. Wolff suggested that if rules for sections of the track like the final corner of the Red Bull Ring are changed, some acceptance of the drawbacks will have to be made. I think we've either got to go back to the sausage curb and take into consideration the teams and drivers shouldn't complain if they break their cars because that's clear, he said. Or you've just got to let everybody go where they want. That's the only other solution, as they do in some of the races in the United States. What do you think of the track limits debacle? Should the FIA have made an adjustment? Well, whatever you did think, it looks like the FIA is going to make a change. With a new statement from the FIA, a number of track limit infringements are still being reviewed, and they have recommended that a gravel trap be installed at turns 9 and 10 to try and help prevent the number of issues in future races. So it looks like Horner will get his way and not Toto, and one team that was not impressed by the handling of the track limit situation was Aston Martin, with the team lodging a protest against the official results. Hours after the checkered flag fell in Austria, Aston Martin lodged an official protest against the results of the Austrian Grand Prix. No one really knew what the protest was for, but everyone only had one guess. Not only that, but at the time, the FIA confirmed in a statement that they would be examining each and every potential breach of track limits. During the Grand Prix, race control was tasked with reviewing well over 1,200 instances where a car was reported as potentially leaving the track. The results will be updated once the review of those who were not able to be reviewed during the race is complete. Now, it's great that the FIA wants to rectify its mistakes, but why it took so long to get this out is the real question, as not only does it affect the race, but as Horner said, it makes the sport look amateurish. So now that the dust is settled, what exactly happened and who was affected? That process took hours, but the final classification has now been announced after 83 further lap times were deleted. 12 time penalties were handed out in total, though none of them affected the top 3. One of those to get a fresh penalty was Lewis Hamilton, who had 10 seconds added to his race time. That means that he dropped a place in the final standings. His Mercedes teammate George Russell moves up to 7th place as a result. Carlos Sainz was the biggest loser thanks to a fresh 10-second time penalty. That drops him from 4th to 6th, losing 4 World Championship points as a result, with Lando Norris and Fernando Alonso benefiting. And finally, Pierre Gasly receives the only other penalty which affects the points positions. His extra 10 seconds means that Lance Stroll leapfrogs him into 9th place, and the Alpine man loses a point. Elsewhere, and perhaps less importantly, Alex Albon and Logan Sargent received 1 new 10-second penalty each, while Yuki Tsunoda had 5 seconds added to his time. Nick de Vries was given 2 post-race penalties for a total of 15 additional seconds. I mean, just listen to that again. 83 lap times deleted and 12 penalties handed out. To be honest, it's a joke, and Aston Martin ultimately benefited the most from the decisions, but the FIA needs to take a serious look at itself. Gasly had this to say about it. We've been talking all weekend, and I think it would just be easier for everyone at home, in the steward's room, and all of us drivers to just drop it. But there is a rule. I love football. The rule in football is the same, and that was the way it was this weekend. I do believe, though, that if you go 10 centimeters wider, you damage your car and lose performance anyway.